Namaskarams to all. The caption, India's options in a disrupted world, is very profound. This has two dimensions. One is the disrupted world. Today's world is not disrupted in a sense in which the world was disrupted in the past. Religiously, militarily, colonially, the world has been disrupted. In fact, whenever people talk about world order, I laugh within myself. There was never a world order. We were cheated into believing that there was a post-World War II global order. We were cheated into believing that there was a post-Cold War world order. And we were cheated because we believed that the powerful nations will ensure order, but they were the ones ensuring disorder also. Whosoever was powerful was playing the same role. Whether it was the colonial powers, later the Americans, and now look at even Chinese. Because their grammar of power is not to ensure peace or stability, because their civilization does not teach them what is the worth of peace and what is the worth of non-violence, which are our great contribution to the world. I will start with where I did not want to begin, because this title forced me to begin there. You set apart India on the one side and the rest of the world on the other, apart from the fact that you see more diversity here than the rest of the world put together. This highly diverse nation, till the one Professor R.J. Ramal studied mass killings all over the world for 30 years and put it on the website. That website is called Power Kills. You must read that website. Where, in which place, how many people, how they were killed. Power Kills. And that website was put in 2007. I don't think any academic institution in India, in IIT, including the IIT, in which I taught, ever even looked at it. It says 1.2 billion people were killed in 2,500 years all over the world. But till the 13th century, there was no mass killing in India except Emperor Ashoka's Kalinga War. How is it that with such a diversity, this civilization maintained peace and harmony? It's a question which the world will not ask. Why we shouldn't ask ourselves? So it is not given to other civilizations to even think of peace. They only think of domination, rule, imperialism. We should understand that. It is not that we can change America, China. We have to change ourselves. This is where Kautilya was important. First, I would like to make 7 propositions. India is 1/6 of humanity. Unless we influence the world will influence us. The first proposition. Second proposition is, the days of territorial conquest is over. The days of even ideological imperialism is over. These are days of battle of ideas. It is ideas that will disrupt nations. No army, no amount of economic sanctions. It has been proved by a country like Vietnam. So countries stand up to these things. But what may disrupt a country is powerful and wrong ideas which can go across the world in seconds today. So we can't fight this battle with others' ideas. we must recall our own ideas, which are in tune with our DNA, cultural DNA, our civilizational understanding, our worldview. I don't think any other nation has a 5,000 year, almost undisrupted continuity of thought, way of life, like India. China had, but it had huge disruptions, huge killings. And even in that country, Xi Jinping, when he addressed the centenary of the Communist Party of China, the Communist China, which wanted to destroy the cultural China, religious China, civilizational China, he said, the Chinese civilization of the last 5,000 years will guide us now and forever in future. Because they were discovering their own ideas. And they wanted to destroy Confucius in 1965 Cultural Revolution. And they began opening neo-Confucian centers all over the world because they had no other identity. So this battle, the disruption of the world, will be first initiated by ideas. So we must be prepared to fight this battle with ideas. And how Kautilya responded to that is very important. There is very little knowledge about it. There is more in Pakistan government's website about how Kautilya responded to Alexander than in India. I saw, before that I'll go into it, Post-Pokhran 2, India was looked at like this. Till then nobody even looked at India. When Pokhran blast shook India, I was there at the finance ministry at that time. I heard finance secretary saying that this government has destroyed the country. Everybody was silent. Nobody knew how to respond. Only one man, N.K. Singh, my friend, he came out with the idea that this has created a huge nationalist and cultural civilizational feelings of Indians all over the world. And so he said, this is the starting point of our recovery. He said we should issue India development bonds for $5 billion. In those days, $5 billion is today $100 billion. Nobody thought anyone would put $1 on India at that time. But the civilizational awakening among Indians, you don't know, you must have recalled when the Pokhran blast took place, there were Deepavali all over the world. A defeated civilization found hope. That became the economic recovery. We got $6.2 billion. That is what made the Americans feel that there is a civilizational element in India. Then they began working, and I don't want to go deep into it, that in those 3 years only, India achieved current account surplus for the first time in its history from 1952 till now. And our economy posted the best growth. We achieved 60 million jobs. Our inflation was 4.5%. At that time, Abdul Kalam, who was the scientific advisor, we had a discussion in the Prime Minister's office. We were sitting together. He said, Mr. Gurumurthy, somehow ensure that these sanctions will continue for the next 10 years. Otherwise, we won't think for ourselves. We are importing thinking, we are importing equipment, we are importing ideas, we are importing everything. So, India's options in a disrupted world has two elements. One is the short-term options, about which you will do more thinking. Long-term options, about which I will try and speak something, for which I have to go back in history. Two questions arose after Pokhran 2. Everybody began looking that this is also because the world measures a country not by its wealth alone, by its capacity to destroy others. So India has acquired capacity to destroy others. Japan is even now an important country. It has huge wealth. It has bank account which can buy maybe half of America even today. But it is not looked at. In fact, I had a discussion with the Japanese number 2 in MITI, who said we issue a check for $58 billion for our defense. We don't even own a platoon of army. Do we call ourselves a country? So, India acquired the capacity to destroy, and then the world took notice of us. Please understand, this is a world of destruction. This is a world of power. This is a world of senseless pursuit of domination of others. And our civilization does not recommend all this. And it doesn't have a defense against all this. So we have to find a new mechanism, new way of looking at this. And that is what we are struggling to do for the last 25, 30 years. So, the 2 charges which were made against India was that India lacks strategic culture and it lacks the will to power. Many people do not know that the term will to power was taken from Nietzsche, who was responsible for destroying the world in the Second World War with these great ideas of power. Even now it is being used in strategic community. That India lacks the will to power is sourced in Nietzsche's Nazi ideology. Most people do not know today. They keep on using it. India lacks the will to. This was quoted, if I remember right, on the 13th March 2013 in the Economist magazine. Cover story was, will India rise as a superpower? For which one objection was, it lacks the will to power. That means will to destroy others. Second thing is, it lacks strategic culture. These are 2 important points which I will deal with, and how our ideas about ourselves were distorted during the colonial period. Prejudices became opinions. Opinions became conclusions about India, and I will tell you 2-3 points only in this respect, because without which I cannot take you to Kautilya and post-Kautilya period. You know, in 1817, John Stuart Mill wrote, he was one of the most powerful thinkers. He wrote that Indians are a barbaric people. It's a barbarous civilization. The man never came to India. He never met any Indian. He never studied any Indian literature. But he said this. Next was Karl Marx. In 1853, he wrote 2 articles in New York Herald Tribune, which is now the International Herald Tribune, that this is a society in which there is economic differences are also very little, and it is organized on village republic basis, and it has not changed for 2000 years. It's a barbaric society worshipping cows and monkeys. And so the British are destroying the social and economic foundation, stable economic foundation of India. They are destroying, and it is very painful, but it is a pleasurable destruction also, because otherwise India will not be prepared for revolution, which is necessary for progress. He wrote this before he wrote the Das Kapital. Then, in 1835, Macaulay, he wrote his minutes. He said the entire colonial literature will not be equal to half a shelf of the British literature. All these people were saying, writing, concluding about India without knowing about India. This is the most important thing. And in 1899, one man called Rudyard Kipling, he wrote a poem which rationalized the colonial conquest. The poem was, I have circulated it, I don't know whether you will be able to, you will not have time to read it now, but you must read it. It is The White Man's Burden. Many people do not know that Rudyard Kipling was born in Bombay. And he was 24, just 24 when he wrote this poem. I don't know when exactly he wrote this. This poem was put out in Times, London, and one newspaper, American newspaper I have mentioned, New York Sun. On this 7th of February 1899, note the date. On the 9th of February 1899, this poem is discussed in the American Senate in the context of whether America should conquer and rule Philippines or not. That this man who was born in India, who knows about the colonial people, these are all uncivilized and barbaric people, you please decide whether you can rule them or not. They can never be enabled to be like you. This was the discussion in US Senate. 2 days after this was published, when Rudyard Kipling was still 24. He became a global celebrity. His ideas, his poem, you must read that poem. It is one of the badly worded poems. Leave aside the ideas. And white men took it as there any amount of literature you can see. The white men believed it is their burden to civilize the world. This is how prejudices about India became colonial opinions. And post-colonial period, this became our education also. Even today there are people who feel that we had a barbaric past. In fact, the latest discoveries show that Asia is the only country barring which had no dark past, barring China. And it is the Europe which had a dark past. That is the academic conclusion today. But that is not what we read in our textbooks or in our public discourse. Everything, all these were falsified by one watershed event in 1872 when Monier Williams discovered Sanskrit. What he said about Sanskrit is very important. He had already read Latin, Greek literature, and he came to spread Christianity here. He said Sanskrit is of wonderful structure, more perfect than Greek, more copious than Latin, more exquisitely refined than either. Human life would not be sufficient to make oneself acquainted with any considerable part of Hindu literature. If this discovery had come 100 years earlier, none of these guys would have spoken like this. This is a conspiracy of history that the chronology changed. This is the first watershed event which would have changed the colonial prejudices about India. But one good thing that happened in the West was that there was always a counter-opinion. But for the counter-opinion, no material was available. There were people willing to defend us. They came much later in the form of Indologists, but that was in the 20th century. So, the colonialists were also dishonest because they had to show that they were a superior civilization. In 1820, Edward Pocock, a Greek scholar, wrote that the source of Greek civilization is Indian civilization. This book was written in 1820. The book title was, it is even available, that India in Greece, that is the title. And he had beautifully described who are the forefathers of Greek is not known. Greek language doesn't have a grammar. It has a mother language. And Greek language and Sanskrit language have comparative words. And he said that Philosophes are the forefathers of Greek people. And the word Philosophes is related to Phalasadesha, which is Bihar. And from Bihar, the migration took place. And he traced throughout the migration, there were traces of Mahabharata, Ramayana, and Ganga in the names of the rivers. This book was destroyed. Otherwise, how will the colonialists say we are your masters? Then another book came, The Shape of Ancient Thought, by Thomas Machiavelli, who is also a Greek. His book is a recent book, 2001. And the bibliographical references in that book is almost 1/3 of the book. His conclusions were that the entire Platonian and Socrates thoughts had no laboratory in Greece. They only spoke, but the laboratory was in India. He said it is the Vedas and Upanishads which constituted the laboratory for the thought and how the thoughts travel. He concurred with Edward Pocock without referring to him. And he made two important conclusions. He said when the colonialists went and conquered all over the world, they found the conquered people had no worthy language, no worthy literature, it's all some colloquial languages. But when they came to India, they found Sanskrit. The language of the slave is the language of the master after all. But all the prejudices had been built much before that. And the second conclusion he makes is that the pre-Hellenistic Greece imported from India and the post-Hellenistic Greece began exporting to India. And that is where I am going to come to Kautilya. So, the second watershed event was the Indus Valley civilization. How dishonest were the colonialists? Before the Indus Valley civilization, when they had found out Sanskrit, they said, these are Indo-Aryans, our people. They went and civilized India. But when the Indus Valley civilization was found, they changed the whole theory. These rascals, they went and destroyed a civilization. That is how Asiatic society trotted out the Dravidian Aryan theory, which we suffer even today in Tamil Nadu. Promoted by the British. So their whole theory changed. Civilized Aryans became pastoral Aryans. Dravidians became civilized. Aryans became conquerors. It was called Aryan invasion. Then they called Aryan migration. This was all lapped up by our academics, our historians. This is how we formed opinion about ourselves. The second watershed event was Indus Valley discovery, which is continuing today, and it is not limited to one part of India, it is all over. It has still not entered our mind. The third thing is the discovery of Arthashastra. The Arthashastra was discovered in 1907 and it was translated in 1913. I will tell you how Arthashastra disappeared all over the world later. But the fact is only one copy escaped in Tanjore Library, Maharaja Library, which was given to the Mysore Maharaja Library and then translated. But by that time they had concluded India had no idea of ruling itself. There was no model. There was no war model. There was no war rule. There was no king. It is all what the Puranas say is mythology. Conclusions about us. Which is the history of India even today? When this was translated, I don't think it was sent to the army to read. I don't think so. It was still in history departments here and there. Only one copy. Why it was destroyed all over India, I will tell you. The colonialists whose prejudice became opinions never changed their views, even after finding evidence to the contrary. The fourth watershed event was the study of Paul Bayrock and Angus Madison, that the Indian economy was the most powerful economy for 1700 years. This occurred between 1983 and 2001. When I was teaching in IIT in 2011 to 2014, the IIT students were not aware of it. And before that, Professor Raj Krishna, when he was asked a question, that we have been a socialist country like other countries, but they are going faster, more than us. How is it that we are not growing even though we are a socialist country? He replied beautifully. Whichever policy you may follow, you can only get the Hindu rate of growth, which is being talked about even today. In fact, 5-6 years back, Montek Singh Ahluwalia said, we broke the rule of Hindu rate of growth only during globalization, only when we went on liberalizing. This kind of illiterate ideas about India, or the settled ideas about India in the minds of the English-educated elite in this country, which is one of the biggest idea battle we have to wage. All these 4 watershed events did not percolate in the Indian discourse. And that is why, even after Arthashastra came into being, that it was written well before Machiavelli wrote the Prince book. There is a difference between the two. The Machiavelli wrote his ideas, that's all. But Kautilya was responding to a challenge which he saw in the form of Alexander. It is a continuity. He was modifying our civilizational approach. That you can't, with this approach, fight the new enemy. So, Machiavelli's is a theory. Kautilya's was practice. This is the first thing we have to remember about Kautilya. And I will come to now the idea of strategic culture, lack of strategic culture, and lack of will to power. We must admit that as a civilization, we were always ambivalent about power and violence. This is I would say, the greatest positive aspect of Indian civilization, as well as the negative aspect. So long as you had no enemies, this not only helped you to have peace and harmony amongst yourself, you had laid down rules of war to prevent war. Like, if you had an army, you can't conquer others. You have to give notice to the other side. And you have to hold a yajna, Ashwamedha yajna. If people attend that yajna, you don't wage a war with them. If somebody challenges, you have a war with them. And then you fight and win, you have to restore the kingdom back to him. This was called Dharma Yuddha. And when Alexander came, our people did not know how to face him. There are 2 versions about Kautilya's encounter at Takshashila. He was a teacher there. In fact, it is beautifully described in Pakistan government's website. I had downloaded and kept, but I don't access it now. It said that the Pakistan government website says that Takshashila was the greatest university. It is named after Takshaka, the snake god. Even now, the snake worship is prevalent in Pakistan because of this. Who says? Pakistan government website. And he said, this is where Kautilya taught, this is where Chandragupta Maurya studied, this is where Ashoka studied. And I recollect this, but I don't have the downloaded copy with me, that Kautilya confronted Alexander, saying, why are you waging the war and creating so many problems for the people? If you have any idea of conquest, why don't you give notice to the other side? Who is he? He orders his arrest, and Kautilya runs so fast, he goes to the forest. He sits and thinks that with our existing war models, with our approach about conquest, about violence, about the idea of state, we will not be able to handle the new enemy. And that is how he produced Arthashastra. Arthashastra was a strategic response, an enemy-specific response. The prince was not. The prince is theory. So Arthashastra was the first strategic response, well before the prince. In fact, it should be the other way. Machiavelli should be called the Greek Kautilya. He came after Kautilya. Kautilya produced a very original theory that if you want, you must have a regular army. We never had a regular army till then. In Mahabharata, you called everybody wherever you want to wage war. There are only 2 wars in the Indian history, and both were without the border. Have you ever seen wars without borders, whether something is right or wrong? Was the purpose of to decide this was the war? So, Kautilya said this Dharma Yuddha and Dharma Vijaya won't work. We have got to go for acquisitive warfare, what is called the Lobha Vijaya. This is all in our history. In fact, A.L. Basham has dealt with it so well. One of the reasons why India could not build an empire was despite its enormous martial tradition, it could not marshal the tradition into building an empire because of its war rules, which were noble. So we could not weaponize we became, valor was more important than war. You look at Mahabharata. The only man who thought of victory in Mahabharata was Sri Krishna. Arjuna wanted to kill Karna, his war ends there. And Bhima wanted to kill Duryodhana, his war ended there. Neither the Pandavas nor the Kauravas also had the same thing. We must kill them. For them, the valor was more important. But Krishna was the only man who planned Pandavas' victory. He went and met Kunti and destabilized Karna's mind, and then took his kavach and also got a promise he will not wait. Arjuna did not think of it. He didn't even know about it. So he first changed the rule of war. Rama told Ravana, you are disarmed, I won't kill you. You come tomorrow and fight. Krishna completely changes it in Mahabharata. Kill him. He is not entitled to the protection of Dharma when he hasn't observed it. This is the strategic shift Krishna brings about. That is what Kautilya takes on. He said you can only show dharmic response to people who will observe Dharma. 1,000 years we had very powerful empires. First Maurya Empire, then Kushanas, then Guptas. Then came one man called Kadambari Bana Bhatta. He is also from Bihar. He said this Kautilya is an adharmi. He is a promoter of violence. He justifies ends by means. He doesn't care for means to achieve the ends. And so, he is an adharmi. This one powerful statement by him. Because when Kautilya promoted this model, our people also began killing each other, conquering each other. So Banabhatta clicked. Ashoka has destroyed a peaceful society. And Arthashastra disappeared all over the country. In North India, bits and pieces, later it was found. There was no Arthashastra. With the result, valor became more important than victory. Prithviraj Chauhan, Maharana Pratap. Then Chhatrapati Shivaji came. He changed the rules. That victory is more important. This is how India's strategic culture struggled and developed because of our ambivalence to power and violence. We can't see bloodshed. Even in our rules of war, you should not fight in the night. That the man on the elephant should not fight a man on the ground. A horseman should not do this. If somebody drops the weapon, he is not a fighter. If somebody injures, he is a patient. Detailed rules of war. V.R. Ramchandra Dikshidhar has listed it so beautifully in ancient India's rules of war. Why we failed as a civilization, you will find by reading that. It's not that we lacked valor. In fact, in his Wonder That Was India, the author says that India's valorous tradition is unmatched. But its victory was impeded by its own rules of war. And these rules of war were not followed only in Mahabharata. In Kerala, Padmanabha Menon wrote The History of Kerala. That's a book worth reading. It's downloadable. It says in the 16th and 17th centuries, 16th and 17th centuries, when Portuguese invaded Kerala, the Zomri kings had a war model. They wrote a letter to Portuguese. Sir, these are our rules of war. There is a lake on this side, there is a lake on the other side. You can perch our army there. You will perch our army here. And we will beat the drum in the morning. Then you can hit us. And we will hit you only if you beat the drum also. In the evening, you will beat the drum or we will beat the drum, close the war. There will be no night war. There is school there, that should not be affected. People are farming there, that should not be affected. The Portuguese said, is he asking for a war or sports? So it was not Mahabharata. And in fact, the Waitaway, who observed all this, he writes that when the Zomri kings fought, the armies used to be relating to each other. They will even share their rations. At the beat of the drum, they will separate and begin fighting. Have you ever imagined a civilization which for 5,000 years kept this important war model alive because of its philosophy of peace and harmony? This is what Kautilya changed. Every time we had this tussle, should we kill people? We are living in a world which will kill. And it will not kill on the border. Today they can kill from 5,000 kilometers away. How are we going to respond with this civilizational hangover? Shivaji he set the very noble rules of war. Not touch the women. All the rules of war which became called noble in 1999 or 97 at The Hague, where they began treating combatants and non-combatants and war slaves in a humane manner, which they did not do. Actually, they said only Christian slaves should be treated gently. This was the rule. We had these noble rules of war. And we interact with army, other countries' armies and intelligence people and strategic thinkers. Have we ever mentioned that we were a civilized nation for 5,000 years? Have we ever said this? Unless we know this, we feel that pride and we tell this. How will they know? They think they are the civilizers of the world. It didn't stop with enemy-specific response is strategy. Many people think Mahatma Gandhi weaponized this non-violence because of helplessness. No. He knew this enemy is very proud. He is liberal, he is democratic, he is rule of law. That is where you should hit him. You cannot organize this society into a violent society. There may be one or two people here and there. There cannot be a mass violence in India because there is no mass purpose in India. It is not you have to convert the whole world. Somebody is a kafir. Somebody is a heathen. You have to finish them. You don't have a philosophy like that. You don't have an ideology like that. You have an inclusive philosophy. You look at everybody. Mahatma Gandhi knew violence won't work in India. And violence won't work against the British. And non-violence is a strategic weapon which he used. The British did not know how to handle the damn thing. He was a strategic thinker. Strategy does not mean only war and weapons. Strategy means ideas. Judge the enemy, how to respond. And in the same way, unfortunately, after we got independence, we lost the idea of what is strategy. And we became the most unstrategic nation in the world. The first Prime Minister reported in studies by army people then army commanders, that when he asked, what about our military policy? Military, we don't need a military, we believe in non-violence. Pakistan slapped in 1948. China slapped in 1983. This whole 63. This whole civilization was humiliated. The first strategic move was 1971. We forged an international alliance. First. Nobody thought India would ever do it. 74 was the next step. Though nobody explodes atom bomb for peaceful purposes, but we did it. The best announcement was 1998. The strategic India was seeded in 1998. Afterwards, you see the change in the situation. People began talking to you. Then only you became worthy of being talked to. And of course, there has been an eclipse of that for about 10 years when we became virtually an impotent nation. See the whole Bombay burning. We could do nothing and we were carrying candles. Situation changed. Afterwards, we began reacting. We began teaching the enemy the lesson in the language in which he will understand. The strategic India began re-emerging. And against that, there are, you see, the ideas that are being spread is against the very emergence of this strategic India. So, step after step after step, and finally you see Operation Sindoor, where the might of the army, the mind of the government, and even very largely the country got unified. We have to educate ourselves that we were no inferior civilization. We got into this trouble because we were a superior civilization. But this is not the way we understand it. You know, Ashoka's Kalinga war was described by V.R. Ramchandra Dikshadhar as an adharmic war because he did not give notice to the other side and he killed 100,000 people. Afterwards, what is the use of regretting? This is the mind of India. So my appeal to the strategic community is that we must study the entire civilizational approach to war, violence, strategy, enemy. It is said at several times Prithviraj Chauhan allowed Muhammad Ghori to escape, which Shivaji would not have done. Because he will apply the rules of dharma only to the man who will follow dharma. Not a man who will seize the first opportunity to kill you. That's what he did. And because of this one miscalculation, Delhi was captured. And for 1,000 years, Delhi remained in the hands of enemies. So it's a very, very profound subject, idea. And there is, I will conclude with what is the purpose of the session and what is my alternative suggestion. Every nation constructs a strategic culture through historical memory, provided the historical memory is properly recalled. Civilizational narratives. Do we have any? Geopolitical experience. Do we accept Kautilya's geopolitical experience as the product of Kautilya and distinguish it from the Prince, which was written purely as an idea breaker? Second, unless formal doctrine, strategic culture deeply influences how the states perceive threats, adapt over time, and calibrate responses. Unlike modern India's strategic culture has been shaped by colonial trauma, colonial prejudices, post-independent pacifism, post-independence continuity of colonial prejudice, and a civilizational ethos of non-aggression. No, it was a civilizational ethos of ambivalence. We were a dedicated non-violent society, and we did not know how to handle a violent world. This is the conflict which Kautilya resolves. In fact, he says, I am not giving a new law. I am only modifying the existing law for this purpose, that you have to build an empire, taxation system. You have to go right down to the last man. A new state architecture which is more accurate, more practical than was ever conceived in the West. Even Hobbes' Leviathan theory, the social contract theory, does not go anywhere near Kautilya's specification of how the state should function. He says 6% of the revenue you should forego because there will be bribery. How practical the man was. He recognized. He was a practical person. So we must read Kautilya as a path breaker for a civilization that was caught in confusion. He gave clarity. Banabhatta confused them again. Shivaji reversed it. Mahatma Gandhi gave a clarity. Nehru confused it. Indira Gandhi began recalling a strategic approach. And of course, Narendra Modi is now carrying it forward with greater vigor. Thank you very much.